I've got a lot of hours in the Splatoon franchise. The numbers are certainly inflated compared to the amount of time I've actually played, because during the process of making a video, like right now, as I'm writing, for example, I'll keep my Switch on in case there's something I want to film, like I'm filming this right now, meaning that I'll sit idle in the lobby for hours at a time. Even so, you don't get near 10,000 hours logged without playing quite a bit. Over time, a lot of the novelty of the game wears off, and hardcore players find themselves interested in different aspects of the game than before. Now or Never is an incredible piece of video game music that is no small part of the appeal of Splatoon as a whole. When a newer player hears it, the intensity that it adds to the end of a turf war match is incredible. But I've heard it thousands and thousands of times by now. I can use it to judge how close to the end of the game we are just by hearing what part of the song we're in. While it is activating a lot of thoughts in my brain about planning for the critical moments that will decide the game, it's not having the same emotional impact anymore unless the stakes are higher, unless this is a tournament match or something that sets this game of Turf War apart from the other thousands and thousands I've already experienced. The task of improving at this point becomes more a matter of analysis and refinement than exploration and trial and error. It's not that the game becomes less fun the more you commit to it, just it becomes more about the game's depth and less about the game's novelty. I can continue to play this game competitively and have just as good a time, even if nothing's really surprising me about it anymore. But something that's impressed me about Splatoon 3 is that every now and then the devs figure out a way to add something that has the same novelty for me, a veteran player, as I felt the first time I heard Now or Never kick in. The challenge that changed all the players' jump heights was one of those moments, and now the addition of the Grizzco roller has been another one. I want to talk about what makes this Salmon Run only weapon so great, because even for you, an audience that got to play it, it might be a bigger achievement of game design than you think it is. Some context for those of you who didn't get to play it, and for people who have no idea what I'm talking about and are just here to listen to me say words. This is the Grizzco roller. It is truly ridiculous, in a way that only a tool in a video game can be. Because its visual design is ridiculous, its place in the story is ridiculous, and every ludic element about it, every mechanical game design decision, reinforces all of that ridiculousness. Look at it. It's absurdly, disproportionately big compared to the player character. Not only that, but it's top-heavy. It's got a whole engine and some kind of propellant with exhaust fumes coming out a tailpipe at the end of it. This device is most of the way toward being functionally definable as a vehicle rather than a paint roller. Mechanically, it has a few different means of painting and doing damage. Like any roller, it has a horizontal flick and a vertical flick, which is activated by doing the same input as for the horizontal flick, but while airborne. The vertical flick has a lot of distance and does a lot of damage, but it's prohibitively slow. And aside from dealing with steelheads, which you need its range for, nobody cares about the vertical flick. Its horizontal flick is a lot faster and has some important use cases, but also, nobody cares about the horizontal flick. What everyone cares about with this weapon is what happens when you hold down the fire button after a flick and start running around with the roller held to the ground. As with any other roller, if you roll into an enemy, and the damage you do with the roller is enough to splat them, you roll right over the top of them and keep going. Otherwise, you deal that amount of damage and bounce off. The Grizzco roller does an insane amount of damage, 400 to be exact, which is enough to one-shot Cohawks, and at least take out the vast majority of a lot of bosses' health bars. It's not uncommon to roll over bosses with this much damage just from following up on a teammate's chip damage. Now, the Dynamo Roller also does 400 damage when it rolls over something. The difference is that the Dynamo Roller moves like this, and the Grizzco Roller moves like this. This movement speed is literally unprecedented anywhere in the game. Nothing else lets you move this fast normally. It actually breaks Splatoon's typical game design in a really interesting way. Typically, the fastest movement available outside of exceptional cases like super jumping or using a zipcaster is swimming. It's one of the quintessential advantages of swimming. One of the reasons you would go into swim form instead of just walking around and firing your weapon all the time like it's a normal shooter game. While you're doing damage or painting the map, you're never able to move as quickly, so you're constantly having to make the tactical decision of whether your time is better spent moving quickly, refilling your ink tank and healing, or dealing damage and spreading your ink around. The Grizzco roller's rolling, though, is faster than swimming, and is also its best source of damage. Because of the speed you build up, you can jump further by rolling forward and then jumping than you can by swimming and then jumping. The only reason to swim now is to refill your ink tank so you can go back to rolling around at the speed of sound. This run cycle is just hilarious. It's like they took something that looked realistic and proportionate and just hit the fast forward button and added a smoke effect. It's so Looney Tunes, so comical, so out of control. It's an absurd amount of speed, mechanically and visually, and absurd in a way that's very funny. I've seen little kids playing Splatoon games for the first time gravitating towards the rollers, not just for their ease of use, but also because they're really funny to roll someone over with. There's a slapstick comedy to it that's been an ever-present novelty of the series, and the downright goofy pace at which you can do that with this weapon amplifies the effect. I know those kids just couldn't stop giggling while they careened around with this thing, chaotically mowing the salmonids down. It's not that this weapon trivializes the game mode necessarily, not that it removes all challenge. You can still bounce off a boss into a source of damage or off the map. You can accidentally vertical flick, locking you into a painfully long animation that lets enemies close in on you. You can run out of ink at a bad time. Lots of bosses can't be damaged by your rolling mode, so things like drizzlers and especially steelheads force you to use attacks you'd rather not be using. But it's undeniably a strong addition to any team, especially when the rest of the weapons on the team can compensate for the roller's weaknesses, and its strengths are pretty ridiculous. The generic enemies that don't drop golden eggs, known as lesser salmonids or just lessers for short, all get one-shot by being rolled over. So with a Grizzco roller on your team both moving faster than anyone is capable of moving, and one-shotting everything it makes contact with, you kinda just don't need to worry as much about lessers, and everyone else can focus on dealing with bosses and scoring eggs. This lets the Grizzco roller make expeditions into dangerous areas more easily than any other weapon, and it doesn't even have to worry that much about running out of ink, since its tank is surprisingly efficient in comparison to other Grizzco weapons. The Grizzco Charger is incredibly fun, with a fast fire rate and a hefty 200 damage per shot, not to mention very satisfying sound design, but it runs out of ink in 7 shots. The Grizzco Slosher runs out in 4, but the roller can go for a pretty long time, traversing much of the map before it needs a refill. It barely has any downtime, and since that downtime is best spent using what is now the second fastest normal movement option available in the game, it can navigate that downtime pretty gracefully, likely getting something useful done the whole time. This is a hilariously unbalanced weapon in comparison to others. In a PvP game mode, that could be a problem. Unbalanced weapons make it so that competitive players are forced to play them to take advantage of their disproportionate strengths to gain competitive advantages, leading to metagames in which only a few weapons appear in tournaments and the variety of tactics goes way down. This has happened at a number of points in Splatoon 3's competitive history. At one point, after a top-level Japanese tournament in the depths of the infamous crab meta, it was noted that only 4 weapons, Splash, Sloshing Machine, Stamper, and Flingza, accounted for 85% of all weapon choices made by the teams that qualified for the final rounds. Whether this particular roller would actually be strong in PvP modes is a moot point though, because Salmon Run is different. It's a PvE game mode, and it doesn't let you choose your weapons. Something that's really weak can feel a bit unlucky to get, and the devs still have to keep an eye out for weapons that underperform to give them the boost they need to not feel like dead weight on the team. But if you give someone a weapon that's unbalanced in that it's too strong, that doesn't negatively impact anyone's experience. Everyone on the team is happy that you hit the jackpot. Nobody has to figure out how to counterplay this busted thing, because the only opponents to it are computer-generated drones who are going to respond to you the same way as if you were holding any other weapon anyway. This crazy design is also totally in keeping with the in-game lore, because it's a special design by Mr. Grizz, like the Grizzco, Slosher, Charger, Umbrella, Blaster, Stringer, Dualies, and Splatana before it. Mr. Grizz is an initially mysterious character who runs Grizzco, the company you're working for on every shift of Salmon Run, both in Splatoon 2 and Splatoon 3. In the in-game tutorial you get in Splatoon 2, where you're given a tour of the hub area of Inkopolis Square, the game refers to the Salmon Run lobby as that creepy shop back there saying that they're hiring for some sketchy job and that you might want to think twice before you apply there unless you really need dough. Our very first impression of the place, even before we enter, even before Mr. Grizz communicates with us at all, is not to trust it. Then the dialogue with Mr. Grizz confirms that we should be skeptical. They clearly value their profits more than the safety of their employees. Even so, if you've offered to work with him, you have a common goal. So he pays you well, and every now and then he lets you use the really good stuff. When a rotation has Grizzco weapons, you can find this dialogue at the end of a mission. He's giving you the good stuff, the big toys, the equipment that really makes you feel powerful. And it may well just be a carrot on the stick for you to keep risking your life, but it's a really tasty carrot. It brings to mind the same sense that you get about the Heavy's minigun in his Team Fortress 2 Meet the Team video.
She weighs 150 kilograms and fires $200 custom tool cartridges at 10,000 rounds per minute. It costs $400,000 to fire this weapon for 12 seconds.
He's not here fighting for some cause. He's here because he loves getting to shoot his really big, ludicrously expensive gun. It's like how little kids look at huge excavators and tractors and cranes and want to operate them, but having that much power means you can do a lot of damage, so they aren't trusted with it until they get older and go through professional training. Now they're older though, and not only is that trust in their ability to handle themselves empowering, but now they have the ability to demolish a building by pulling a lever, and that part feels cool too. Grizzco weapons are the very biggest, most ridiculously powerful tools. They aren't exactly refined, elegant designs, so much as the answer to the question, what if we made the bow fire more arrows? What if we made a rapid fire sniper rifle? What if we strapped a car engine to the dynamo roller? Is that exhaust cloud around you safe to be breathing? Is that engine going to overheat and explode? They're the sort of thing you would expect out of videos by I Did a Thing or Michael Reeves, the kind of engineering YouTubers that are brilliant, but aren't exactly out to make something practical or safe. The kinds of people that you check up on every now and again to make sure they haven't electrocuted themselves or something. Only the best for the happy little Salmon Run workers to enjoy doing their job without thinking too hard about why they're doing their job. How else would people get suckered into doing something that's obviously not in their best interest, if there weren't some part of it that were fun or alluring? Obviously, it's just a video game, and we get to have all the fun with none of the real moral consequences of our actions. Except, do we always? If you've played to the end of the story mode, you know what I'm talking about. Even if this were a real-world company, and lots of people would avoid it just for the safety concerns, there would still be some people out there getting taken advantage of because there's something really inherently satisfying about going vroom vroom with a big engine. And that's enough to let us turn our brains off and not think too hard about the eggs we're stealing. So when I laugh at how
so stupid,
and people talk about how their IQ drops a few points whenever they start using this thing, we are pointing out how silly it looks and how simple a novelty it is to just make roller go really fast. But also recognize that it takes some great design choices to make something like this work. It takes an understanding of the appeal of your game and how you can subvert the way that it works to create different effects. There are a bunch of different artistic mediums working together to form the fusion of all artistic mediums that we call a video game. And it's not easy to make all of them line up as beautifully to paint the picture, animate that picture, record the soundtrack, design the game mechanics, and tell the story of the Grizzco roller. Bravi tutti, Splatoon devs. You did good.